Thank you, Sian. It's really good to see you all here this morning, particularly those of you who've travelled from afar through that weather. And I guess in a very sort of British way, you can hear the chatter over coffee about the the terrible weather and whether you've remembered your brolly and so on and so on. It's interesting to see whether there's any chatter around the fact that obviously these one-off or one in so many years weather events are actually linked back to climate change, and of course I would suggest as Future Generations Commissioner that they are. I'm really pleased to be with you to share some of my thoughts on how we approach together the implementation of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I'm also really grateful for you for saving me from getting involved in my office move, which is taking place today. So if nothing else, you have certainly saved me from having to unpack a whole load of boxes. But I want to discuss today with you my role as Future Generations Commissioner and the journey that we're all going on together to implement the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And I'm sure that you've come here today to learn more about the approach that Hugh and I will be taking. And my team thought it was that there was a fitting title for the event was the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, the Hugh and the How. And whilst I was quite tempted by that, the reality is that we're not here to tell you what to do. We certainly don't have a monopoly on wisdom, on how you implement the Act or even how you measure its implementation. And so today is really about having a conversation with you about how together we bring about that radical change that Hugh mentioned, which will take us towards that vision of the Wales that we want to see. And I was really pleased to hear just how passionate the Wales Audit Office, and Hugh in particular, is about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and in playing a part in bringing about that culture change that the Act requires. To hear about the need to radically change from the Auditor General surely shows that we mean business and shows just how committed we are to working with each other towards doing this. And so Hugh is absolutely right. This legislation is groundbreaking. It is unsettling, but in many ways I think that can be a good thing. Because whilst I'm sure you will all say that unsettled is the new normal in public services in 2016, with the challenges of decreasing budgets, reform and reorganisation, I would say that perhaps the way we deliver public services has perhaps been settled for far too long. So we may be going through some uncomfortable and challenging times in terms of having less cash and having more demand. But if we approach it in the right way, being in a position of being outside our comfort zone is no bad thing, because as the saying goes, a comfort zone is a beautiful place to be, but nothing ever grows there. And so I think the Act is just what's needed to unsettle the status quo, to ruffle a few feathers and to bring public services back to the purpose that they were set up for in the first place, to improve the lives and well-being of people here in Wales today and of course for every tomorrow to come. And I do know that there's a real hunger out there for change, both in terms of the change that the public are demanding of public services and of course by the people like yourselves who are working in those public services themselves. And of course there are very many good examples of where we're beginning to see the change that we want to see. So the fire service, for example, supporting the ambulance service as first responders, the shift in many local authorities to early interventions with families, the work going on to change how we source our energy in the public sector. But our challenge now is to make these things the norm, to systematise these things, stop piloting things, and then not finding the funding or the will to continue them. Because I do think that by accepting what we have right now in our mainstream services and the mainstream way that we do business as normal, as just the way things are, as business as usual, is not good enough. It's not good enough now, and it certainly won't be good enough into the future. Because if we have a look at what business as usual looks like right now, business as usual means spending £21 million a year on the prescription of antidepressants, but not necessarily getting any happier. Business as usual means the planet's temperature getting a little bit warmer every year. Business as usual means that by 2020, up to 2/3 of our wildlife will no longer exist. Business as usual means that 14% of our population will experience 4 or more adverse childhood experiences during their childhood. And business as usual means that there is every likelihood that individuals will be referred between various agencies and units and departments several times before getting the care and support that a person needs. And it seems to me that if the events of 2016 are anything to go by, business as usual is certainly no longer good enough. And our future generations may well study the events of this year, of the revolt of the disenfranchised, and wonder what we did to address this. What did we do to ensure that some of the unsavoury events that we're seeing in the UK and across the world do not spiral further into a cycle of post-truth political decline? What did we do to ensure that people didn't feel ignored, feel left behind, and like they have no say in their local service provision? It's clear to me that now, more than ever, we need to do things differently, radically differently, if we are to win back the trust and respect of the public that we serve, and if we are to provide better services now and into the future. And so I do think that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act can be that catalyst for change. For those of you who are hungry to change, this is your opportunity, this is the permission, the confidence boost that you've been waiting for to work differently. And for those of you who aren't, it's now your legal obligation to work differently, to refocus the lens through which you approach your work. It's time to rewrite the rule book, to rewrite the new normal. And so quite rightly, Hugh described this as a journey, and whilst it seems like everything these days is described as some sort of X-factor transformational journey, it was described, the implementation of the Act was described to me the other day as an expedition. So we haven't been there before, we don't quite know what will hit us along the way, we'll have to be willing to test ourselves, but ultimately what we discover will change outcomes for future generations. And I do think that it's important that we're open and realistic about the fact that this cultural change is not going to happen overnight. And as we move through turbulent and ever-changing times, the road towards the wellbeing goals is never going to be straightforward and easy. Fortunately, I do think that the legislation itself acts as a guiding framework for implementing the Act and the Sustainable Development Principle, requiring public bodies to integrate, collaborate, plan for the long term, seek to prevent problems before they occur, as well as involving those affected by the decisions in the decision-making process. And since coming into post in February this year, I've dedicated about 80% of my time to early engagement. So I've met with all 44 of the public bodies covered by the Act, a number of the public service boards, and more than 100 third sector and private sector organisations, as well as a range of individuals. And it has been really encouraging to hear just how passionate a number of those people, a number of those organisations are about making the Act work here in Wales. To listen to some of the opportunities that the Act offers, but also to listen to some of the concerns and challenges that lie ahead. And overall, I do think there's a real tangible enthusiasm for driving this Act through from all levels within the public sector. But often there's a misconception that the spirit of the Act is at odds with our traditional view of audit, that audit will be a barrier to achieving the innovation and culture change that the Act envisaged. And that's why Hugh and I are here together to let you know that we are working together on this and working with you to find a way to measure success without strangling innovation, that we can challenge your thinking without doing what often happens now, which is we, the government, other commissioners, other inspectorates, give you a list of things to do, which you therefore do blindly. And so the challenge in this is as much a challenge to us to construct a system that supports you towards that transformation rather than towards a tick box. And we're here, the who and the how, to reassure you that the work of the Auditor General and the work of my office are, despite our different duties, one and the same. That by applying the Future Generations lens to your work, you will be delivering against both sets of statutory requirements. That is for the audit, and that is in terms of my role within the Act. And notice here that I didn't mention the word compliance, because if we are to drive through that transformation, not tick box approach, we need to move far away from our compliance culture of doing things at the end of the year because we've had to do it. And I always reflect on my experience in the public sector, having been at the end of those phone calls from the person in the corporate planning department who says, around about January, February time, can you tell me some stuff you've done on this so that I can report back on, on my annual report for the corporate plan. And that is about that sort of compliance culture. That is about the tick box, not building it in right from the outset. And that's absolutely not what we want to see happening as part of working through this legislation. It's our hope that you will do these things because you see it as common sense. They're the right things to do, both now and for future generations. And that's why I see my role, certainly at the early stages, as being a supportive one. Because if we are to achieve the Wales that we want, this needs to go beyond the duties placed on the public sector. This needs to be cross-sector change in organisations with a refocus on values and with changes in behaviours and mindsets. It's going to require collaboration amongst yourselves, but also between private sector organisations, third sector organisations, universities, academic institutions and community and third sector groups who can help us achieve this holistic vision and fill the gaps where we can't. We want to make it clear that this isn't just some left-of-field initiative. This is a collaborative, wholesale approach to changing the inner mechanisms and rusty cogs of the public sector. And I'm confident that there are enough people out there within our organisations, within the civil service, within local government, within all of our public sector bodies who are passionate about bringing about this change that we need to see. And have, in fact, as I said earlier, very many of them been waiting for an opportunity to work differently and challenge their colleagues and their organisations to work differently too. And whilst I don't want to waste any time in calling out those who are not committed to make that change, I do understand how difficult it can be to change the way your organisations work and how difficult it is for those who are proactive and really get the spirit of the Act to try and overhaul the inherent bureaucracies of the public sector. And that's where I really want to focus my efforts in supporting you going forward. Getting the balance right is something that I will be grappling with over my early years, the balance between being a finger-wagging commissioner and supporting the change needed. And I certainly don't want to be in that territory of being a finger-wagging commissioner. Of course, there are going to be some issues that I'm going to need to call out. One of my first interventions, for example, around the M4, a big issue which I feel the need to call out. But since April, I have written to and met with all of the 44 public bodies covered by the Act and have made explicit my offer of support when it comes to the early implementation of the Act, as well as supporting the public services boards in the way they carry out their early wellbeing assessments. And I want to be true to the spirit of the legislation and the powers that it confers on me in terms of the way that I support long-term cultural change rather than demonstrating a few short-term fixes where I can point to the fact that you have a process in place to demonstrate that you are, in theory, meeting the obligations of the Act. And yes, of course, some process will be required, but the Act is really about a shift in mindset. And so I really urge you not to see the implementation of a process around the Act as the end game in itself. Both Hugh and I are committed to working with you to work out how we can measure your progress in a way which gets to the nub of the cultural change needed rather than the nub of the paperwork which says you've done it. And we recognise that our approach needs to be consistent so that it's clear for you on the ground implementing the Act, and we're in the process of developing our mutual understanding of how we're going to work together in partnership to play our role in implementing the Act with you. And as Hugh mentioned, this will ensure that our messages are consistent and that the work we do will complement and assist each other and you without duplication. And so it was good to hear a recap of the work that Hugh and the Wales Audit Office have been conducting since the Act came into force, such as the work of the Good Practice Exchange team, as well as hearing Hugh's priorities going forward. Now, as for me, it's been a busy 10 months, as I said, getting out there, engaging with key stakeholders and community groups, as well as recruiting my staff, moving into the new office today, and working together to develop just what we want to do as an organisation and what our key priority areas will be. You can imagine that it's fairly challenging, unlike other commissioners in Wales who have a particular section of society or particular area of interest to deal with. My remit covers all policy areas, everyone in the population and everyone who isn't born yet. So obviously that's significantly challenging, and I will need to narrow that down into some areas of focus. So my early engagements, the Wales That We Want conversation that led to the development of the Act and the meetings with each of the public bodies, have informed a list of potential priority areas that I'm having an ongoing dialogue about. And as you can imagine, there isn't really any issue that doesn't have some implication for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And so alongside my role in supporting you in your implementation of the Act, I want to set out some key policy areas that I see as having the biggest impact on future generations. So in terms of the interim areas that I'm consulting on at the moment, they are climate change, economic strategy and poverty, early years and adverse childhood experiences, preventative healthcare with a particular focus on the demographic challenges of the ageing population, and potentially farming and land management issues post-Brexit. So these areas are currently being reviewed using a range of evidence and inputs, and will go out for consultation to be confirmed and decided upon next year. And in doing this, I'll also be taking into account the range of issues that will be coming from the local wellbeing assessments, which you, or as part of your Public Services Board, you are currently undertaking. And being consulted on the assessments will really give me a useful opportunity to ensure that they are developed in a manner that's likely to achieve the wider intentions of the Act by capturing and sharing the learning as early as possible in the process. And whilst I don't expect the assessments to be perfect this time round, they will be an important indication of the degree to which public service boards are taking the Act seriously and trying to challenge themselves to do things differently. This will be one of the most important areas for transformation, not tick box, of course. And in terms of how I respond to the draft assessments, I've been keen to develop a partnership with academic institutions to ensure that my approach to analysis and evaluation is sufficiently robust. And I'm pleased to say that I'll be working with Cardiff University, Dr. Alan Netherwood and Dr. Mark Lang in taking this work forward. And this approach is part of my office's focus on collaboration and maximising opportunities for learning and building relationships. And I recognise that to undertake my role effectively, my staff will need to access a wide range of expertise and develop some of these innovative working relationships. And this is just one of many pieces of exciting and fast-moving work streams taking place within the office at the moment. And we've been keen to show that as an organisation, we are not only talking the talk, but we are also walking the walk. And that's why I've been keen to involve as many people as possible in the discussions to inform my early work plan. And hopefully many of you will read some of the feedback from these discussions in my recent Talking Future Generations report. We've also made sure that our office is reflecting the integration and collaboration principles. Firstly, in pretty much all of my back office functions, those things, if you like, which should be no-brainers. So payroll with the Ombudsman, HR and interim finance support with the Children's Commissioner, accommodation with the Welsh Language Commissioner in the south and with Bangor University in the north. But we also have a number of joint appointments on some of those front-facing roles. So a number of secondments, including colleagues from South Wales Police who's undertaking work on early years and adverse childhood experiences, a shared appointment with the Children's Commissioner looking at how the UNCRC can be implemented within the context of the Future Generations Act. I have partnerships programmes with the Bevan Commission, with the Welsh Government, and we'll shortly have joint work programme with Public Health Wales on ACEs. And of course, I'm in a discussion with a number of academic institutions about how they can support my work going forward. And so this is really about working in partnership, which I always say is running through or must run through my organisation like a stick of rock. And that's about embedding that collaboration and integration principles. So I think there are exciting times ahead, and you've heard from both Hugh and myself how we see the early implementation of the Act, but it's now up to you, because really regardless of what we say, it will be what you do that determines how successful the Act will be. And when the Act was passed last year, you will have all heard this quote from the United Nations: "We hope what Wales is doing today, the world will do tomorrow." But as I always say, it's the second part of that quote which is the most important. Actions more than words is the hope for our future generations. So it's time to move beyond words, do more than just talking about the Act, and it will be your actions that will bring about these changes. It's your actions that will redefine what business as usual is and how you will lay the foundations for that vision of the Wales we want to see. And so this event here today is about you, and so we're eager to hear your thoughts and your opinions on the next steps for achieving that transformation. At many conferences and events, you'll hear the phrase, we value your views and feedback and opinions, but we are genuinely saying today, we value your views, opinions and feedback, because as I said earlier, we certainly do not have a monopoly on wisdom. In particular, we value your views on what the Future Generations Commissioner's Office should be focusing on over the next few years. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity of having such a large amount of brain power and expertise captive in one room, and not to extract as much useful knowledge from you as possible. And so to help us gather as much useful information as possible and to understand your priorities, we're testing today a method developed at the Wales Centre in Bangor University. Now, in the reception, you will see the Wales Audit Office Good Practice Exchange stand. It's the obvious one just at the end before you come down the stairs with a red tablecloth. So could I please ask you over the coffee break or over lunch to spend a few moments sharing your views on the priorities for my office with the people at that stand. And you'll be able to do that electronically or on paper if you prefer. The facilitators on your table will also be able to explain the process to you. And of course, they'll be working with you throughout the course of the day to capture your discussions and the things that you want to see change. And so I'd like to thank you for listening this morning. I'd like to end by reiterating that, of course, we are working on this together with you. It's now over to you. It's your opportunity to give us your feedback on how you think we should approach this work, what you can do to improve the lives of people here in Wales today and for future generations to come. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.